Ingrid Bergman had a freshness and vulnerability. She was able to project that quality all of her life. Millions of movie fans recognized it and adored her for it. But Ingrid the woman was more complex. My mother sometimes compared herself to a train moving down the track. Nothing and no one could stop her once her mind was made up. Whether it concerned changing her looks, a film role, a marriage, banishment from her adopted America, or separation from her children, she had a determination of steel. One could call her stubborn, or one could say that above all, she trusted her own inner voice. She would not listen to the guidance of others. Those of us who lived with her knew this. And when, toward the end of her life, she endured serious illness, Ingrid Bergman was determined to live and to die her own way.
I was so happy to have gotten out of reality and come into my world of imagination that I had lived with since I was a child, that I felt at home. The camera never frightened me. I have never had any fear.
I've thought about it, and it seems to me that my mother was fated to be an actress in a certain way, because the way she saw her own family was always through a lens or on photographs. Her father, his name was Justus Bergman, was a painter and a very early photographer, and he had a photographic studio in Stockholm. And he used my mother a lot as a model, so when she was young, he would pose her either holding a newspaper or putting on glasses or a funny hat. And he took moving pictures of her when she was 1 and 2 years old. My mother had a little bit of film footage of her own mother, but that's the only memory that she ever had of her mother. Friedel, my mother's mother, died when Ingrid was only 3. She has film showing her as a child going to the graveyard to see her mother's grave. And I know that my mother looked at those pictures over and over again. And then her father died when she was 13. So all she had left of her father was his photographs of her and the moving pictures.
She always had a photo of them by the bed, and then when my mother died and we collected her things, we noticed that it was full of traces of her lips. She probably had been kissing them.
That must have been the closest that she could get to family life, and it was always seen through a lens, always seen through photographs. When she looked at her father, it would have been through the lens of his camera.
Yes, I was a very sad child and very lonely, and how I saved myself was to invent the characters that I could talk to, because I was terribly shy.
Sometimes it doesn't affect you when you're somebody else, when you could put on the clothes and the character and the words of another person.
Sometimes I was the poor beggar, and sometimes I was the lonely mother, and then as I grew a little older, I started to read things and learn by heart. Poems, always very dramatic poems, and I read monologues out of plays, or I took pieces, just a short story, and I dramatized it. My father, he took me to the opera. He wanted me to become an opera singer, and I was very unhappy about it, and I took singing lessons.
At the beginning, she thought she was going to be a singer because she has never seen actors. She grew up at a time where there was no television and very little films, so she was brought to the opera. And when she saw those people on stage, she wanted to go on stage and sing. And then one day she was brought to the theater and she saw people speaking and not singing. And she said, "Oh my God, I don't have to sing. I can just act. That's what I want to do."
And that is how I became an actress, not knowing what I was doing was acting. But I always lived with all these characters in my fantasy.
My mother was 15 when she found work as an extra at the movie studio in Stockholm. She said she could not believe that she'd been paid to have so much fun. At 17, my mother was accepted into Stockholm's Royal Dramatic School. But the prospect of 5 years more schooling was not appealing. The memory of working at the film studio was vivid, and when the offer came for a speaking part in a movie, Ingrid took it, against the advice of her teachers.
They were so angry with me when I wanted to leave. But you see, when you're young, you're in a great hurry. And I was so anxious to right away get big parts and be a well-known actress. Sure of myself I was. I was so happy to have gotten out of reality and come into my world of imagination that I had lived with since I was a child, that I felt at home. The camera never frightened me, and everybody thought it was very funny when I did my very first scene that I was going around so happy and not at all frightened. That stayed with me. I have never had any fear.
And I think I heard her say, "Well, see, I always knew I was going to become famous," which I thought shocked me. I said, "Well, this sounds so pretentious." And my mother was anything but pretentious. She was very simple. You know, there was a simplicity about her that was terribly disarming. I can understand wanting to know, since you are a child, wanting to be an actor or wanting to be a musician, but to have this absolute certitude, in total modesty, that she was going to be so different, that she was going to be noticed for her differences.
When she married my father, she was still very much a girl. She was 18. She was living with relatives. They were protective of her. My father was teaching dentistry when he met my mother. My father, I think, represented very much stability and knowledge and somebody who seemed intelligent and capable. And I don't think she'd been out a lot. It's understandable why my father would fall in love with her. She was very beautiful and had that vulnerable quality and that youth and talent and enthusiasm. She had a wonderful sense of humor. You know, she was just fun to be with. And one of the things my mother kept all of her life was a childlike quality. And I think that all great actors and actresses have that too. They are able to be children. And that feeling of let's play, my mother carried that through all her life. Let's have a good time. My mother was fixated on her acting career, and I don't know how much she sentimentalized my birth. As I knew her, she was most happy on a set. I think when she wasn't working, she felt she wasn't doing anything. She was wasting time.
I just thought that she had an incredible drive. She was an artist, you know, and I always imagined an artist as being somebody who needs to do paint or write. They cannot help it.
When she was very young, she actually was very vulnerable, and she retained all her life the inner core of vulnerability. After she began to hear her voices and she began to assume the garb of other characters, she was able to go into the world with this force that she also had, a driving force, seeing one path, knowing where she was going, being defined by her work, clearly right from the beginning. The Swedish film Intermezzo brought Ingrid to the attention of American producer David O. Selznick. It happened because of the instinct of his assistant, Kay Brown, who would become my mother's lifelong friend and agent.
Mr. Selznick sent me to talk to her and to get a contract with her. And I kind of worried as to whether or not this was a wise decision on her part. At any rate, that night we were walking in Old Town, and I had the courage to bring it up. I said, "You sure this is the right thing that you want to do? You've got a wonderful husband and a lovely baby, and you have all the work that you want. And she said, yes, it was, because she wanted challenges in life and work in life.
There was little doubt in my mother's mind. The move to the United States would change our lives, but she saw it was the chance of a lifetime, one she believed she had to take. In May 1939, Ingrid Bergman arrived in New York. She was 24 years old, and she traveled alone, carrying one suitcase. Producer David O. Selznick was eager to meet the young Swedish actress. He had agreed to star in a remake of Intermezzo. My father and I remained in Sweden, where he was in training to become a brain surgeon.
I don't know where I got my determination and strength from. I was so young and I wanted so much to try my wings in Hollywood, but immediately I was considered too tall, and they were going to do something with my face and change my name. And when I heard all that, I got terribly frightened, and I said, I want to go back. I don't want to do all that. So I refused and refused and refused, and then they accepted my name and what I looked like. And then Selznick looked at all the tests that he did before Intermezzo and decided that the left side was the best side.
A day to remember always.
I can't bear to see it end.
And so whenever we had a close-up in Intermezzo, it was always that side that was turned to the camera. I arrived in Hollywood exactly at the right time, because they had all these actresses that were so made up, and everything was so phony in a way. And I came there and I was completely natural.
Once my mother then came to the United States and started working and was successful in a few of her early films, she began to express herself more and more about what she wanted to do and the kind of movie she wanted to do. Because the way she was being presented to the public was something like a Swedish milkmaid. Good-hearted, sweet, family girl, just home, you know, all the time. And they didn't know what to do with it, because when they couldn't turn her into a glamour puss, they sort of decided, okay, let's go with the country girl.
I was just the simple girl, the refugee, and the good girl. And I got very, very tired of always being so good. When they cast me in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Lana Turner was going to play the little barmaid, and I was going to play Dr. Jekyll's fiancée, who was a very nice girl. And I was by then so fed up with it and terribly worried, because I didn't want to be typecast. I wanted to be an actress and play everything.
You aren't half the first one, aren't you?
I forgot to mention, my friend and I are physicians.
Physicians? Physicians?
Doctors.
Doctors? Oh, go on. Oh, I thought you were a couple of tops.
No, haven't the leisure.
Oh, dear me. And here I thought...
And I was terribly pleased, because more people told me, you were not in that picture. Yeah. No. And I said, who was it then? Well, I can't remember her name. They didn't recognize me.
Here is hoping that Dr. Jekyll thinks of his ivy, as I know he'd like to.
The next part my mother played called upon her to choose between loyalty to her husband and romantic love. My mother had no idea that the picture would become a film classic, Casablanca.
Go ahead and shoot. You'll be doing me a favor.
Richard, I tried to stay away. I thought I would never see you again. That you are out of my life. you left Paris, if you knew what I went through, if you knew how much I loved you, how much I still love you.
During the shooting of Casablanca, my mother's mind was really on another role. Maria, in For Whom the Bell Tolls. Her new short hair was copied by women everywhere.
Here in the rugged mountains of a war-torn country, a man and a woman from two different worlds found an eternal love. The incomparable Bergman as Maria, whose close-cut hair was a symbol of shame, until he kindled the passion that burned away every dark memory.
Oh, if there's nothing to do for you, I'll sit by you and watch you. Any of the nights we'll make love.
You are shameless.
Critics called her luminous,
Love me, I love
and she
you.
was given her first Academy Award nomination. In Gaslight, my mother is as fascinating today as she was in 1944.
But Elizabeth, but you saw him. You opened the door for him yourself. No, but say it, Elizabeth, say it.
No, Mum. I didn't see anyone at all.
He was here. I know it.
You see how it is, Elizabeth.
Yes, sir. I see just how it is.
I couldn't have dreamed it. I couldn't have dreamed it. I couldn't have dreamed it. I couldn't have dreamed it.
It was a lovely performance, and for it my mother won her first Academy Award. That idea that you can have it all is a fallacy. You can't have it all. My mother, when she came to America, had to immediately face that dilemma and face that dilemma over and over in her life. Whether or not to stay with her children or whether or not to pursue her career. It so happens that the career was in Hollywood, and it so happens that my father was going to medical school in Rochester, New York, and I stayed with him. It was deemed that that would be best for me. My mother came to visit occasionally, but she spent most of her time in California. Eventually, we all went to California. We all lived in Beverly Hills. My mother then traveled and was away, and there was always this pull for her between how much time she could spend at home and how much time she was to spend on her art. So-called real family life was never as real to her as what was happening on a set. And the people she met on the sets, I think, became substitute family. And I think people on a set are a better substitute family sometimes than your own family, because I think very often the director is like the father figure, and maybe there's an older actress who becomes the mother figure, and then there are the brothers and sisters who are all the other actors. But those people never present as much a problem as your real mother and father and your real husband and your real children.
I take it this is your first honeymoon.
Yes. I mean, it would be if it were.
I think making a movie is a vacation. I always call that my vacation. It is absolutely no work at all. To get up in the morning is not difficult. Then you are taken care of. And all they ask of you is to get up there and say a couple of lines. There were so many restrictions. I don't know how they ever could make as good movies as they were.
I'm sorry to intrude on this tender scene.
I knew her before you did, loved her before you did. I wasn't as lucky as you.
Ingrid Bergman's 7-year contract with David Selznick came to an end. During that time, she took parts like the nun in The Bells of St. Mary's. People responded to her performance with total belief. My mother then became set on playing a saint.
I think she identified, to a certain extent, to Joan of Arc. Not because she felt she was a saint, but because this was a 14-year-old kid from the country that became a warrior and fought for France against the English. And I think that kind of call that Joan of Arc had was the same kind of call that Mother wrote in a diary when she was 12. I have to keep a record of this great life that is ahead of me, because I'm going to be one of the most important stars.
Naturally, as a man wants to play Hamlet, a woman wants to play Joan of Arc. And when I was a child, I must have read about her in school. And then I started to collect medals and things. And I waited and talked to many people, and no one was interested. And one day I got a telephone call from Maxwell Anderson. He said, I would like to have you for a play about Joan of Arc. And I said, that's it, you don't even have to ask more, I'm coming.
The success of Joan of Lorraine on Broadway enabled my mother to make the film Joan of Arc, the story of the French farm girl who followed her inner voices, even though it meant death. My mother not only put her money into the picture, but also her whole heart.
Bergman, beautiful, bewitching, breathtaking.
God has spoken to me through his messengers. And it is his will that I come to aid you and that you be king of France.
Don't trust her, my lord.
I'm trying not to trust her, but every time I look into her eyes, I believe what she says is true.
We did the absolute honest version that we could find. And with all the combings of hair, I think it should have been rough. Everybody came up and smoothed you out, and it was very glossy. Even the battle scenes they are beautiful, but not in the right sense.
In God's name, strike! Strike boldly!
And the censorship was so hard on us that you couldn't do anything that was really down to earth.
My mother was deeply disappointed in the reception to Joan of Arc, as well as to some other movies she made in those years. She was becoming disillusioned with Hollywood, and her marriage to my father had become strained. This is when she first saw the work of Italian filmmaker Roberto Rossellini.
I happened to see a picture called Rome Open City, and it so struck me, it so moved me. It was the real feeling, and the people were real, and that wonderful human feeling came across the screen that it was hard to find. I didn't think Mr. Rossellini would ever get enough courage to write to me, because I was in those days very high on top of the box office. He wouldn't possibly get the idea that I would like to come to Italy and make one of his little pictures, and for very little money. So I had to tell him that, and I didn't know how to do it except write a letter.
My mother had left home many times for other roles. Why should this be any different? But this time it would be years before she would return. Again, I remained with my father, who was then a neurosurgeon in Los Angeles. I was 10 years old. Ingrid Bergman arrived in Italy in 1949 to make a picture directed by Roberto Rossellini called Stromboli. But the movie itself paled into insignificance compared to the world scandal that would soon break.
We had a story outline, and then the dialogue was always written as we went along. My leading man was a fisherman, and he thought he was going to work in the crew. He had no idea that he was going to become my leading man. Mr. Rossellini didn't like actors, and he wanted real people. I said, All the close-ups has to be from this side. And he said, are you out of your mind? I shoot my picture the way it suits me. I don't care which side of the face it's going to be on. And from then on, I threw it out of my mind.
And I think besides the great filmmaker, she discovered this great, generous man. And Mother has always been a little bit of a scared creature. She was always very shy and a little bit scared of people and a little bit afraid of authority. She was very independent, but she, like a child, like a child who would stand her ground but would not fight back. And Father came with his immense generosity, immense lightness. The world was out there for him to enjoy. And I think she came from a Swedish background that taught her the world is out there for you to obey, to bow, to be respectful. My father never thought of that. In fact, it was even considered unrespectful. Not that I consider him unrespectful, but there were no rules for him. It was life, I thought he brought her so much optimism, so much vitality, and a great sense of adventure.
But it was a marvelous way of getting away from everything that I wanted to get away from, and that was all the ease. Here was nothing that was easy. In Hollywood in those days was like a dream. If you wanted pink elephants, you'd get pink elephants, or you get trained flies or anything. Call up and we get them for tomorrow. And all the talent was there, and an enormous amount of people in the crew, and I was very spoiled, which was the complete difference when you came to Italy and you did everything yourself, and in a very, very hard way. But that is what I wanted, and I got what I wanted.
In 1949, my mother fell in love with my dad, and she was married still to Peter. That created an enormous scandal, and then to make it worse, a few months later she got pregnant. She wasn't married, and she wasn't even divorced from Peter. That created a scandal that was of epic dimension.
I certainly thought that there would be some write-ups in the paper that I wanted a divorce, but I certainly didn't expect for months and years to be headlines and on the first page.
When she had a child with Roberto Rossellini and she wasn't married to him, why it was such a scandal and disaster. If it had been one of the actresses maybe who'd always played the bad girl, they would have said that's writing character. Because Ingrid Bergman was so convincing on screen as virtuous, submissive, and self-sacrificing, her off-screen behavior was a shock. Her former admirers felt duped and betrayed.
So many people tried to tell me that it was their enormous love for me, that their love turned to hatred because my image was the good, wonderful woman who had played, but they forgot that played, a saint and a nun. They forgot that I was a woman and maybe not at all what I did on the screen.
My mother stayed on in Italy with Roberto Rossellini after she made Stromboli. She was denounced in Congress by a United States senator who declared her persona non grata. My father and I lived in California with the enormous public outcry. After strange legal maneuverings, my mother received a Mexican divorce and a Mexican marriage, with stand-ins acting for herself and Roberto Rossellini. My father won custody of me in Los Angeles, with my cooperation. He was desperate. I felt I was all he had left. Meanwhile, in Italy, my mother's family was growing. In 1950, Robertino was born. 2 years later, my mother gave birth to twin girls, Isabella and Ingrid. When you're a child, you think that it's like a story. You think everybody has control and they can make up their mind about their destiny and say, well, you did this wrong and you did this right, and Yeah, but life isn't like that. As you get older, particularly after you have your own children, then you become able to say, oh, it's more complicated. Now I begin to understand. Now I understand why marriages fail. Now I understand why people don't get along with their children. Now I understand why there are absences or there are presents or there are difficulties. As a child, you can't see that.
It didn't hurt me, that the fact that my mother wasn't there every day. In fact, I kind of liked it because I was very noisy. And when Mother and Father were at home, they always told us to shut up because they were on the phone or they were reading something. So when they were gone, house was mine. I could make as much noise as I wanted. So I didn't mind them coming and going, because I liked their affection, and I never felt that I wasn't loved. I think it had been a little bit hard on my sister Ingrid, who maybe has a little bit of mother's character. She's a little more shy, and I think it had been very hard for Pia, who was prevented to see her for years because of the divorce with Peter. But I was a kind of a bulldog, so I really didn't need their presence every day. When I was about 12 or 13-year-old, that found out that I had a deformity on the spine called a scoliosis that needed to be operated. And at the time, it was a major operation, and I'd been in a cast and immobilized in bed. I was sick for about 2 years, of which a year and a half in a cast. And my mother stopped working and was at my side all the time. My father was a total avant-garde artist. The only thing that interested him was to forward a media. Instead, for my mother was, if you want, more the establishment, but by that I don't mean anything negative, more take a theme and develop it until you master it.
No, if I went back home, I would save neither myself nor the others.
But the avant-garde thing, it's a hard way of life. So there's no money, there is always danger, there is always bad reviews. And I think she could not sustain the kind of attack that came not only with the scandal, but even with the unsuccessful films that they had done.
Only when you're completely free are you at peace with the community. Those who are bound to nothing are bound to everybody.
When Roberto was having a particularly difficult time raising money for a new film, he decided to direct Ingrid in a touring production of Honegger's Joan of Arc at the Stake. The entire Rossellini family toured the capitals of Europe. The project was not a financial success. For years, Roberto had been very possessive. He refused to consider that Ingrid might work with another director. Finally, he did agree, and my mother went to France to make Paris Does Strange Things with director Jean Renoir. But the picture that was to return Ingrid to triumph and eventually back to America was yet to come. Anastasia. My mother won more than her second Academy Award with Anastasia. As her old movie self, defenseless and vulnerable, she regained the affection of the American public.
Anna, am I Anna? Why not Tamara or Lisa? Why not Tatiana? Yes, why not Tatiana? No, I don't want this. I want to be me. Whoever I am, I want to be me. I want someone to tell me, someone to accept me, someone...
After the absence of 7 years, she returned to New York to receive an award for Anastasia. Despite the intense questioning by the press, my mother had no apologies.
Miss Bergman, did you have any criticism of the way the press in general handled the story of your life in the past year?
Oh, sure, I had some criticism of it, because I think the person has to have a private life, but I also know that if you choose being an actress, you have to take both sides of the coin. So, there it is.
Looking back on it, do you have any regrets about anything that you've done in the last few years, Miss Bergman?
No, I have no regrets at all. I regret the things I didn't do. Not what I did.
Such as some of those?
No, I think my life has been wonderful because I have done what I felt like. I have never. I was given courage, and I was given a sense of adventure, and that has carried me along. And then also with a sense of humor and a little bit of common sense, it has been a very rich life.
My mother asked me not to visit her in New York, but suggested that I fly to Paris the following summer. I was 18 then and could make my own decisions. Afterwards, we went to Italy, and that summer, my mother had all her children with her for the first time. I enjoyed the idea of having this big kind of family that would be all together with lots of half-siblings, and that we could all get together, and we really could.
And Pia came and became incredibly fond of my father, and lived with us. And to us it was fantastic, because we were very Italian kids, America was still very far in the 50s when we grew up. And to have this fantastic American sister, blonde, wearing pants, that was a big deal in Italy in the 50s. Doing sports, horseback riding, skiing. I showed her off like crazy at school.
Although it's wonderful to have a parent around, you can be raised without having a parent around every minute. You realize later. I think all of us children realized the things she had to contend with. The forces in her life, the call to perform, her need to be in a contented family, which was on the set. I remember when she used to come to Italy, when I was living in Italy there. She would come from France to see how things were going on, and she would come in, and of course, when you've been away and you come home, the people who are there say, "Oh, this is broken, and that's broken, you gotta fix this, you gotta pay for that." Well, my mother would last for about 6 hours with this. And she would say, "I have to leave, I can't take it."
I think that the guilt toward the four of us children wasn't so much that she was an actress and she was working, but it was how she could have avoided fighting with Peter, Pia's father, my father, and how this fight became incredibly violent.
My mother and Roberto Rossellini had made 5 films together. None had been financially successful. After 7 years and the birth of 3 children, their marriage had come to an end, when Roberto fell in love with another woman, and she had his child.
She wondered if there was anything that she could have done differently to keep appease the rage of the fathers.
In Paris, my mother's agent, Kay Brown, introduced her to a fellow Swede, Lars Schmidt, a theatrical producer. He was to be her 3rd husband. Another divorce and another custody fight ended with my mother's younger children remaining in Italy with Roberto's family. My mother settled in France with her new husband. Once again, she lived in a different country than her children. I never heard my mother say that she thought her years in Italy were tragic in any way. I don't think she thought that. It certainly might seem that way if people were just looking at her career and saying, well, what happened to the career? Well, her American career ended. But when she was in Italy, she was making movies there with Roberto. They were working, and I think her life was exciting. I think she thought it was exciting, and I'd never heard her say she thought it was anything but. It was a wonderful time for my mother, a new marriage and a renewed career, frequently acting in plays and television dramas produced by Lars. There would be profound changes in the years ahead, but her need to act, that would never change. My mother loved all the men that she'd been married to. Always. She didn't have enemies. She didn't have relationships with a man and then not like him later and say, oh, it was all a mistake. I don't think she thought any of her marriages were a mistake. After 12 years together, Lars Schmidt and my mother were divorced as a result of a relationship he had with another woman. But Mama remained friends with Lars until her death, much as she had remained friends with Roberto until his death. She knew how to forgive, and I admired her for it.
If I would go to each person that admires my mother and I'll ask to describe it, she would probably come up differently each time. Because I think that is the gift she gave for everybody to shape her in a certain way, the way they wish. And for me, more than anything, she was my mother, my mommy, the one that took care of me when I was sick, the one that would say, you know, your T-shirt is really too dirty, you got to change. The one that gave me the sense of being practical, an honesty beyond belief, a sense of justice.
I remember I took my 2 sons to see Bells of St. Mary. It was playing right over here on Broadway. I said, come on, we're going to see Grandma's in a movie. I want you to see her. And, you know, she comes out on the screen. Well, she was in her early 20s, and she's this, you know, enormous, beautiful head. And they kept saying, where's Grandma? Where's? I said, that's Grandma. Don't you see that's Grandma? They go, oh, where is? That's Grandma. In the early 70s, my mother moved to a flat in London. For the first time in her life, she lived alone. My mother still got movie roles, though some were too far from the image she did best. Mama was in her early 60s when she learned she had breast cancer. I remember it very well because we'd been out riding a bike with my youngest son when she told me. And the doctor had told her to go right into the hospital. But she had plans. So she didn't do that. She went on with her plans because she had that, you know, she heard her voices that told her what to do, and she did pretty well what she wanted to do. She finally went to a doctor in England, and they performed the surgery there, her first surgery. We all went to see her in Paris after the surgery, my half-brothers and sisters, and we stayed with her for a while, and she was in really wonderful humor. She didn't tell a lot of people. She was very brave about it. And she said, well, we'll just go on, you know, we'll just go on. And she did. When my mother appeared in Murder on the Orient Express, she had a supporting role. And she did it with a funny, slightly kooky manner that people adored. She dared to look old and drab, and she won another Oscar for it, placing her in that august category of 3-time Oscar winners. Yes, my mother did not feel sorry for herself. It's as simple as that. Self-pity was not one of her characteristics. Right to the end. You could call that courage, and I guess it is. It is a kind of courage.
No, I don't think she ever perceived herself as a victim. I think that sometimes people saw her as a victim, and I've seen her as a victim because I have seen in her, my mother's eyes, great pain, great anxiety. I've seen it mostly about her disease, but also when she talked about Hollywood and the way she was chased away, her inability to see Pia.
It was not in her vocabulary to say, poor me. Why did this happen to me? She just never said things like that. She just went on. This train keeps going. When the Swedish director Ingrid Bergman and my mother, when they made Autumn Sonata together, the two of them put together their family histories, so to speak. And they made a story about a woman who has a talent, a great talent. And the crisis in this woman's life is whether or not to use her art, fulfill her God-given gift, or stay home and take care of her child. They met, and the first thing she started to tell him how she didn't like the script, she didn't understand the character, this could never happen, and he was like stunned. I mean, he's the maestro, you know. But that was very much my mother. You know, I've read the Mommy Dearest books and the books about children who have had many complaints about their parents' behavior. Now, I don't think you're going to see one of those books from any of my mother's children. And she wasn't there all the time. So you might say, well, there would be a book in that. But nobody is going to. None of her children are going to. And you know why? Because we all loved her. She was fun. She had a good heart. She had a capacity that was very endearing. You know, but it's the iron underneath that. I mean, you wanted to help her and then she'd be stubborn. But that's all right. That was her character. And I think her children accepted that that's the kind of person she was. A few years later, Mama had a second mastectomy. In addition, her arm became immensely swollen, which can sometimes happen with the removal of lymph nodes. So she wore her arm in a sling and called it jokingly my dog she had to carry.
Once she knew she had cancer, I think she decided pretty much on her own how much chemotherapy she was going to take, how much she was going to go forward with medicine that were going to debilitate her. And she was, in her shy, simple way, she was very determined. And I've always respected her for it. And when she was asked to do Golda, I remember she laughed and she said, how can a big, tall Protestant Swede can play a small Jewish prime minister? And then Golda died of the same disease of mother, breast cancer. And she read a few things she did. Golda was so far from my mother, this woman of politics, this woman of great intellect, this woman sure of herself, calm, a leader. My mother was timid, frightened, strong somewhere, but nothing shows. And then she played Golda with the gravity that this fantastic lady exuded. She just had a wig. She didn't put any false nose. She did it just by exuding something that was inside of her. She would wake up 2 hours before going to work, and she would put the arm up so that it would unswell somewhat. And she was able to move a little bit the hand, that she would stay hours in the middle of the desert as waiting for lights and makeup to be done with her arm up, then to quickly do the scenes and then hang her arm again.
The Jewish children in Palestine, the Sabras, are a miracle. I know if you had seen these blessed children of ours, you would want every child here to have the chance to grow up like them, erect, confident, strong, and pure as the sun of Palestine. Well, if I'm supposed to be the mother of Israel, Earth Mother, or whatever kind of mother, I have the responsibility to be a good one. And what a good mother would say to you now is, it's late, everybody's tired, go home.
For her performance, Ingrid received an Emmy Award. It was given posthumously.
I know that she would be very proud of this award tonight because of what it meant to her to film it. And I'm very grateful to be here to be able to thank each and every one of you for this final tribute to my mother. She will live in my heart forever. Thank you.
I don't think that the life she had was one that she would have said, this is my plan for my life. I don't think it was. I think she, had regrets. But her life began and ended on film. Her life in front of a camera, whether it was the photographs her father took of her as a child or working with Ingrid Bergman at the end of her life. That was Ingrid Bergman. Her life was a demonstration of herself as seen through a camera lens. I believe that's how she saw herself too, and I believe she always craved to get back in front of the camera. That's where she wanted to be. So if you say, did she get what she wanted in life? Absolutely, that she got.
Ingrid Bergman's life ended on her 67th birthday, August 29th, 1982. She lives on in her children's memory and forever on celluloid, where it all began.